I start some frost-sensitive summer crops outside before the last frost, but I do it in a way that doesn't risk a significant loss of crops or a significant loss of time and money. Today I'll plant 6 frost-sensitive crops 18 days before our average last frost date, and I'll share 6 measures that I take to minimize the chance that we'll lose these crops to the cold. Before getting into the how-tos of planting frost-sensitive crops early, I should probably talk about why I'd want to do it in the first place. Planting early gives us earlier harvests and makes the work of planting more manageable by spreading it out over time so that we don't have to plant all of our frost-sensitive crops after the last frost. But perhaps the best reason to start early is that it allows our plants to become well established before pests and diseases are much of an issue. One advantage of our colder winters is that there are very few pest and disease pressures in early spring. For example, squash bugs and powdery mildew are the biggest threats to our squash plants. But squash bugs usually aren't a problem until July, and powdery mildew doesn't cause significant damage until August. So the more opportunity our squash plants have to grow and produce fruit before July and August, the better. That's why I'm planting summer and winter squash today, 18 days before the last frost. So those are the reasons I start some of my frost-sensitive summer crops outside before the last frost. Now let's talk about the 6 measures I take to minimize the risk of losing crops to the cold and to make sure I'm not wasting my time and money. First, I don't push my luck by planting too early. The earlier I plant, the greater the chance of losing crops to the cold and having to replant. Today I'm planting 6 crops 18 days before our last frost. Anything earlier than 3 weeks before would probably be pushing my luck. Second, I take the current weather conditions and the extended forecast into account and delay planting until temperatures are above freezing most days and there are no temperatures well below freezing in the forecast. At the moment, the forecast for the rest of April looks very good. No freezing temperatures are expected, and it looks like we'll get a good mix of sunshine and rain. Of course, weather forecasts are subject to change, so additional precautions are needed to protect plants from unexpected cold. The third measure is to plant under cover. Today I'll be planting 5 crops under glass-covered cold frames and 1 under a low tunnel. To prepare for today's planting, I moved cold frames and a low tunnel from where they were protecting cool weather crops to where I wanted to plant summer crops. It's now warm enough that cool weather crops no longer need protection, but is still on the cold side for summer crops. The structures will increase soil temperature to encourage germination of the summer crops, and they'll protect them from the cold. I'll vent the structures as needed on sunny days, but I'll keep them closed most nights. If temperatures dip down into the 20s after plants emerge, I'll cover them with row cover for extra protection. The structures will remain in place until after the last frost, when there's no risk of freezing temperatures. The fourth measure is to only start plants early if their growing season is short enough that I can easily replant them and grow them to maturity if the early crops are lost to the cold. Today I'm starting zucchini, cucumbers, patty pan, acorn, butternut, and cushaw squash. None of these crops have to be planted before the last frost to be grown successfully here. So if I lose the early crops to the cold, I'll just replant them, and all I'll lose is some seeds and a little bit of time. However, other crops like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants have a longer growing season and need to be started weeks before the last frost for optimal results. If I lost these plants to the cold, I might not have time to start them again from seed and would have to buy plant starts instead, at a much higher cost than the price of seeds. The fifth measure is to plant some seeds for frost-sensitive plants before the last frost, but wait until after the last frost to plant out transplants. When seeds are started outside before the last frost, they germinate when conditions are right and the plants are hardened off from day one. As a result, they're more likely to withstand relatively harsh conditions outside. And if they don't make it, I've only lost the seeds and the little bit of time I spent planting and watering. Contrast this with the plant started in my grow room and planted out early. I have to plant it, water it, pay the light bill, harden it off, and transplant it. After all that, the plant is still probably less likely to survive the cold than a plant started outside. Likewise, if I buy a plant from a nursery and plant it out early, I'm spending significantly more money on a plant that will be less well adapted to outside conditions and less likely to make it. So from my point of view, it's usually best to wait until after the last frost to plant out frost-sensitive transplants. Too much time, effort, and money have been invested to risk losing them. The sixth measure I take to minimize risk is to not put all of my eggs in one basket by planting most of my summer crops early. I'm being a little more aggressive this year because our weather forecast looks so good, but I did hold off on planting beans. And if the weather forecast didn't look as good, I wouldn't have planted all of our squash at once. By following these 6 measures, I'm confident that the crops I started today will do well. We'll have earlier harvests, and the plants will have a chance to get established before having to contend with the pest and disease issues that come later in the summer. But if I'm wrong, and we lose the crops to the cold, all I'll have to do is plant some more seeds, which won't take long or cost much. However it turns out, I'll let you know in future videos. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to. As we close, here's another look at the 6 measures I take to minimize risks when starting frost-sensitive crops outside before the last frost. Hey Oscar, how you doing, baby? Oh, good boy.